Full disclosure, Mass Effect is one of my favorite video game series ever, with the second being my favorite game of all time, or at the very least up until the posting of this video. So I'm going into this fully biased, and I want to be clear that any criticisms I dole out are done from a place of genuine and sincere love. And yes, I'm going to be spoiling pretty much the entire trilogy. This isn't a review per se, but more my mad ramblings about a game series I love. You want my spoiler-free review? If you've never played Mass Effect before, this is the perfect time to jump in. If you're an N7 veteran, this is what you already like, but with a tune-up and a new coat of paint. Buy this, play this, have fun. EA still stands for evil assholes. That said, let's talk about Mass Effect was an absolute phenomenon back in 2007. It introduced the world to one of the most well-crafted science fiction universes ever seen in video games up to that point. And it told a compelling story full of memorable characters and choices with actual consequences. It was unlike anything we had seen before. It was groundbreaking, it was epic, it aged like milk. Mass Effect 1 was great at the time, and it has a story that deserves to be experienced. But actually playing it is not very pleasant, and is often the thing that drives most newcomers away from the series. And I can say with authority that the Legendary Edition has made the experience significantly more tolerable. Sure, the graphics have been updated, making everything except Anderson's Uncanny Valley mug look better than ever before, but the way the game controls is where things really shine. Gone are the overly stiff and sluggish fights that were constantly being bogged down by obnoxious weapon sway and bullet sponge enemies. Now headshots actually kill baddies rather than just knocking them down at best. And when you get one shot by a rocket from halfway across the map, it only feels like it's mostly the game's fault instead of entirely. Granted, I played on Insanity, so I guess that's on me either way, but you can't deny that things feel better here. There's a dedicated melee button that makes attacking close-up enemies much more consistent. Grenades have been remapped on controllers so that you're no longer reaching over to select or the back button to throw and detonate them. And everything about combat has been made smoother overall, with significantly fewer glitches to ruin the experience outside of the near constant geography clipping I encountered. I never once had a party member ride me so close that they trapped me in a corner, nor did I have Rex phase out of existence entirely like I did in the original. They even made the Mako control better, upgrading it from a dumpster fire to just hot garbage. Look, I've always been a Mass Effect 1 apologist, but I never liked the Mako. And if you do, that's fine. That's your disorder. You do you. I just can't stand it for longer than a few minutes. It feels too much like I'm trying to wrestle an Elcor into a prom dress. But the changes that were made here are a bit of a mixed bag for me, as they do make getting around at least a little easier at times, but it also makes some strategies obsolete. You used to be able to drive back and forth while aiming pretty easily, which was a great way to deal with turrets. Now, if you don't have the most precise thumbstick control or a keyboard, you elite gamers out there, the Mako's just going to try turning all over the place, making it nearly impossible to cheese the AI like you used to. You see, some of these fixes actually bring up a bit of a rough point. While Mass Effect now plays beautifully, with graphics that outpace the later entries, more on that later, we can now really appreciate how much this game has aged. The sad hard truth is that large swathes of this game are really boring. Don't get me wrong, the main missions, aside from like half of Noveria, are great. They're full of fun set pieces with lots of fantastic lore, characters, and choices, but the side content in this game objectively sucks. The concept of landing on an uncharted world, exploring for resources, artifacts, and side quests sounds amazing. But BioWare didn't have the chops to pull that off in 2017, let alone in 2007. The planets you can explore are basically all the same series of flat open spaces, constantly interrupted by nearly impassable mountain ranges that you are expected to pass. They all just have different coats of paint, and some don't let you leave the Mako for more than a minute at a time. Not like there's all that much to do outside the Mako anyway. If you've seen one planet, you've honestly seen them all. There's almost nothing unique to any of them outside of a couple of them having Thresher Maws, which have gotten a new phase to their fights, so they can take even longer to deal with now. And the side quests you land on these planets to take on are all pretty much interchangeable as well. Most have you enter a prefab with pretty much the same layout across the board to kill a bunch of enemies and maybe interact with something that'll give a sentence or two of lore and a conversation with a character once you track them down. This is an element of the game that has really not aged well at all. And after playing through this trilogy multiple times, I can pretty firmly say that there is almost no reason to engage with this portion of the game at all. Which sucks because it's not a small portion of the game, and some of the side quests can lead to interesting lore and rewards in the following games, but that doesn't really justify spending potentially hours of your life bored out of your mind doing the same tasks over and over again in different barren wastelands. So while I love this game and believe it absolutely deserves to be played, it's good for first-time players and nostalgic vets to keep in mind that ME1 is still rough around the edges no matter how pretty it looks now. Legendary Edition also added in a few changes that are questionable. As I said, I played on Insanity, which is meant to be harder than hard, and I understand that. But why in the hell did they decide to add Geth to Reaper Saren's fight on higher difficulties? This fight was always a miserable experience, as Saren bounces around the arena so quickly that it can be pure CBT to shoot him and survive if you didn't prep yourself right. But when you add in Geth, including rocket troopers who can one-shot you if you aren't built to tank, then that's just mean-spirited. This fight went from sucking like a Hoover to sucking like a Singularity. And honestly, the balance as a whole would probably be my biggest issue with ME1. Some fights gave me no issues at all, such as fighting off Benezia's goons on Noveria. I remember struggling with this fight all the time in the original, but I breezed through it this time around. Other fights, however, are just as, if not more, awful than ever. The Thorian fight is the best example. This fight has always been hell on high difficulty, as close quarter fights against rushing enemies was always the leading cause of death outside of one-shot sniper or rocket kills. So having dozens of Thorian creepers rushing you at all times still blows, leading to a grueling slogfest of a fight. And there's no reason why the devs couldn't have fixed this up a bit. They added enemies in other fights, it really wouldn't have killed them to remove a few of them here. But I'm really just nitpicking at this point. When all is said and done, I adore Mass Effect 1, warts and all. And the Legendary Edition is now the definitive way to experience those warts in glorious high definition. Honestly, I believe Legendary Edition is worth the price of admission just for how much they improved this game. But I still want to at least touch on the other two in the trilogy, because sadly, that's where my praise for Legendary Edition starts to dry up real fast. So allow me to talk about my second favorite game of all time for a second, which is, fittingly, the second game in this series. ME2 was actually my entry point into the Mass Effect universe, and it hooked me right away. I adore Mass Effect 2 so much, I could probably ramble about it for longer than it takes some people to actually finish the game. The introduction where the player character gets murked in a cutscene is such a powerful opening to a game, and it only gets better from there. exploring this universe, working for an established villain, meeting all these amazingly written and performed characters from so many different species and walks of life. God, I just love this game. And with the release of the Legendary Edition, we can experience it almost exactly the same as before. See, this is where my appreciation for the Legendary Edition really goes downhill. You know, I am aware that there were changes made, particularly with lighting and other visual elements to make ME2 look more visually appealing and dynamic overall. But I barely noticed any of that, or any other changes at all if I'm being honest. I didn't even miss Miranda's butt shots, because I'm a Tallymancer, and surprisingly there are more important things that I care about in this life. But this isn't just my opinion I'm going off of here. Well, maybe the butt thing is, but I digress. A number of my friends also got the Legendary Edition, and between all of them, I was able to hear opinions from different perspectives and hardware. And none of us felt like ME2 was all that different. Sure, loading screens went by much faster, also speeding up the animations that played during them, which was kinda weird. But honestly, that was the only solid difference any of us noticed. The only other thing was that maybe thermal clips were more plentiful. Even that we don't really have a consensus on. If any change was made to the amount of available ammo, it was so limited that I couldn't really say for certain even after playing the original and the Legendary Edition pretty much back to back. Well, there was one other noticeable change at least. The notorious orange vest outfit is now gray and black, so yeah, there's that. Now, I'm not saying that anything major needed to change in ME2. After all, it is still a game I adore passionately to the point of it being kind of an obsession. What I am saying is that ME2 Legendary Edition doesn't really feel any different from the original. It's quicker paced due to the loading times being reduced significantly, but that's really it. If you've played ME2 before this, you are not going to get a whole new experience or anything from playing it now. It's clear BioWare went with the if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality here, and that's fine. But when you compare how 1 now plays and looks in this collection compared to 2, it kind of feels like the series is devolving as you go along. With 1 now looking and playing the best while feeling like it has the most cohesive narrative, to the more anthology-style narrative of the second, to, well, Mass Effect 3. It's now time to talk about one of the most divisive games in this franchise. And yes, I say divisive because the majority of sane people out there know Andromeda deserves to share the fate of the Normandy SR-1. Mass Effect 3 was, and still is, kind of a weird point in the series. In hindsight, it almost never stood a chance, having to walk in the shadows of the giants that came before it, as well as wrap up a massive story filled to the brim with major decisions that could alter how the narrative plays out. There was pretty much a Rachni's chance in a Krogan camp that ME3 was going to satisfy everybody, and it didn't. In fact, it pissed a lot, and I mean a lot, of people off. But I was never one of them. Yes, I did hate that all my choices essentially boiled down to picking my favorite flavor of light show, but I still liked the game overall. And I even played it both at launch and months after the fact, so I experienced both the original ending and the extended, fixed ending BioWare released after the backlash. And both suck. It's still a bitter, unsatisfying conclusion to an amazing story. But, like I said, I still liked it. The game is, as a whole, still immensely fun. The combat is as smooth as it was ever going to get on Unreal Engine 3. The universe was still richly built, packed with lore, and fun to explore. And there's lots of genuinely great moments throughout the game, especially with the Citadel DLC, now a standard part of the Legendary experience. It is, at its core, a good game. But it is a deeply flawed game. Plot threads are rather hastily tied up. with massive galaxy-affecting scenarios playing out one after another so we can rush towards dealing with the Reapers and barely any fanfare once they've played their part. Many of the side quests just involve running around the Citadel eavesdropping on people, occasionally solving their problems with a few lines of dialogue or scanning a couple of planets to collect mini lore dumps. A major plot-relevant character was locked behind DLC at launch, so even now 9 years later he feels completely disjointed from the rest of the game and has no actual impact on the story whatsoever. And there are plenty of characters from the series that are just not as involved as they should be, as well as characters that have no right to exist at all, such as Chobot here, and the lamest antagonist of all time who is such a try-hard edgelord that he might as well be a Sonic OC. But despite all the flaws, I do still love this game. It's not perfect. I'd even go so far as to say it's not great. But I do think it is very good at its core. And if it wasn't so rushed and if goddamn EA hadn't meddled as much as they did, I believe it could have been amazing. When all is said and done, I love Mass Effect. And I love the universe so much that I will take almost any excuse to spend more time in it. Hell, I love this universe so much, and I'm such a massive nerd that I run a Mass Effect tabletop game with my friends. So take this from me. If you've put off playing Mass Effect because you heard it pulled a Game of Thrones and slammed itself into a brick wall right at the finish line, I still encourage you to give this series a try. As uniquely flawed as every game in the trilogy can be, I can honestly say I have never loved the universe a video game series has built nearly as much as I love Mass Effects. And the sheer amount of content available here is staggering. If you've never played any of the games in the trilogy, I think $60 or more, depending on where you live, is a plenty fair price. And if you want to wait it out and get it on sale or something, power to you. Also, you shouldn't have watched this spoiler fest of a video, you little rebel you. Now for the 180. If you've already played ME3, DLC and all, there is absolutely nothing here for you. If you're a weirdo like me and you love these games unconditionally, or you just like getting trophies or achievements or whatever, game on. But if you're hoping that the Legendary Edition did anything to improve the game as a whole, I am all too happy to deliver you your disappointment on a platter. The literal only thing that I noticed was changed was Tally's photo. The notorious Photoshop stock image is gone to be replaced by a pretty basic render that was all BioWare needed to do in the first place to avoid being ridiculed for years. That's it. It's leagues better than what we got before, but it is the only change I noticed. And I've played ME3 more times than your average bear. Which is at least once if I know anything about bears. Seriously, I didn't expect BioWare to change much, especially since pretty much all their promotional materials for the Legendary Edition had staff say they were completely happy with ME3, likely at gunpoint.
Allegedly.
But come on! There were super basic glitches that were completely untouched from the original that I know for a fact could have been fixed. Now admittedly, I'm no game designer, but basic geometry collision like this in a nearly decade-old game could not have been outside of BioWare's capability to address. Especially when you consider how easy it was for me to find and replicate. You know, I wouldn't even be upset about this if there was any evidence that they even tried to spruce up, well, anything. The fact that the orange vest outfit had its color changed in 2, but was kept at its original orange in 3 shows that they just straight up did not care about fixing anything in this one. It's painfully obvious that the Legendary Edition is not a remaster of the full series to be the absolute best version of each game possible. It was an effort to revamp interest in the franchise after the abysmal reception of Andromeda by cleaning up ME1 to appeal to our nostalgia and garner new players who didn't want to wrestle with the antiquity of the original. And I'm kinda disgusted that I have to say it worked, damn it! From the perspective of a jaded anti-capitalist consumer, I hate this decision to essentially hold a beloved series hostage and use it as bait to pull sheep like me back into the fold. From the perspective of a sheep who adores Mass Effect, I love that they fixed up an old game so I can love it and spread that love to others as best as I can. This is the most conflicted I think I have ever been on something that I love. On one hand, I want this to succeed because I want Mass Effect to continue. And I want new games in this series to be actual improvements over previous entries. On the other hand, I want EA to burn to the ground and dance in the ashes of an evil corporation that doesn't deserve a penny of support, let alone the $60, or more depending on where you live, they're charging for old games. So I guess all I can really do now is reiterate my review of Legendary Edition Mass Effect. I still hate the ordering of that title. Buy this, play this, have fun, and EA still stands for evil assholes.